As the far left in America continue to increase their power in Washington and across the country, constitutional freedoms are increasingly in the crosshairs, and not just the Second Amendment, folks. COVID-19 vaccine passports and issues like reparations and targeted welfare based on race are gaining steam, presenting significant legal and ethical issues. Joining us now to discuss is Newsmax contributor and distinguished university professor at Touro Law School, Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, thank you so much for being here.
Anytime, Tom.
All right, Professor. This week, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Georgia expressed his support for slavery reparations. Oakland, California is giving $500 checks to black residents with no strings attached. Evanston, Illinois is giving black residents $25,000 in housing benefits. The Biden administration is pushing billions for aid to black farmers. We need to talk about this because these programs could discriminate based on race, and do taxpayers have a potential cause of action to block programs like these and others? Because we're seeing a lot more of them.
Right, Tom. Well, clearly these programs discriminate against low-income, disadvantaged white people. That's true.
Right.
We've learned in the last two elections that disadvantaged, low-income white people don't feel that they have white privilege. They don't experience it this way. So you can imagine how they would respond to this, because where's the equal protection there? I am also in need, they would argue, and yet you've completely decided to benefit only one race, the race of color. On the other hand, look, racism in this country is always understood as the discrimination against or oppression against people of color, not of disadvantaged whites. But it's clear that it is, in this case, the government would be favoring one race, the people of color, over the white race. That's for sure.
Amir, and we were joined by Amir Benno. He's a constitutional lawyer and a legal analyst here for Newsmax. Amir, do you think that we're heading for a legal standoff on equal protection issues when it comes to what we used to call reverse discrimination, reverse racism?
Yes, I absolutely do think so. And here's why. The Supreme Court dealt with these sorts of reverse discrimination issues for about 20 years between the 70s and the 90s. And they issued a lot of guidance on this. But the main rule to come out of this from a 1989 case called Croson from the Supreme Court is that in order for a government to be able to engage in what you call and what they call reverse discrimination, this is discrimination against whites or majority groups, they have to show that in preference for the minorities or black groups, they have to show that the minorities were specifically injured by and clearly injured by a government practice or policy. And they also have to show that no other race-neutral type of way of fixing this is possible. That sort of clear connection between the race-based policy and the injury is where the rub is here, because so much time has passed from slavery that we don't know whether people's disadvantaged status now is due to racism from slavery or whether it's because of the breakdown of families, high crime rates,
right,
dependence on government welfare. And many courts, federal courts, have held that they're willing to look back a certain period of time in order to see whether there's been discrimination, but not 150 years.
Right.
They're willing to look back about 20 years or so. And so, yes, I do think that there's going to be legal challenges.
Okay, we're going to be talking certainly more about this. I don't think this issue is going away anytime soon, certainly. I want to move on, though. Professor, New York has developed an app that acts like a vaccine passport. I think it's a QR code. There are other industries, other state governments are contemplating requiring proof of testing or vaccine. Kind of smacks of sort of a Chinese or Soviet style approach, the "do you have your papers, sir" type of thing. Are there constitutional issues with a government requiring presentation of papers, healthcare documents in this fashion, do you think?
Well, Tom, the Commerce Clause of the Constitution grants the government wide constitutional authority to regulate interstate travel. So, for instance, you could see the government invoking the Constitution and the Commerce Clause because it oftentimes grants authority over citizenship. Remember, Obamacare was rescued by the Commerce Clause, right? So on the theory of interstate travel. The issue here is, there's a public health crisis. The government claims that it has broad emergency powers on behalf of public welfare. But at the same time, it does raise interesting constitutional questions. For instance, can the government prohibit you from going to a church or a mosque or a synagogue unless you have your passport?
Right.
Because that would conflict with free exercise of religion. Or if you, for political reasons, said, I don't want to carry this thing around, I'm objecting on free speech grounds, you can see a conflict between the First Amendment for both free exercise of religion and the free exercise of speech. You're challenging. And then lastly, I would say the right to privacy, right? If one person has the right not to have an abortion, then they have the right over their body, and maybe they have a right to privacy not to have to carry around a driver's license for the coronavirus.
Right.
On the other hand, the purpose of it is really to reassure everyone that it's safe to go outside. It doesn't really divulge any personal private information other than you're vaccinated. It's a much greater infringement on liberty, Tom, to be forced to take the vaccine as opposed to just simply have the passport.
Okay, Amir, we're going to bring you back next time to talk about this. We're going to continue this conversation because, again, this is another one of these issues that we're going to be dealing with for the foreseeable future. And I do think that there are significant legal and privacy issues here. Amir Benno and Thane Rosenbaum, thank you very much for your insights.